China is once again this week provoking Taiwan and threatening the island nation. With analysis is president of the Population Research Institute and author of The Devil and Communist China, Stephen Mosher. Steve, thanks for being here. With all the political noise in D.C. and talks about tariffs, etc., which I'll get to, China is all but being ignored. Just this week, the communist government launched live-fire military drills around Taiwan. This is clearly a warning against Taiwan's independence. How much longer can Taiwan remain independent and withstand this creeping pressure from Beijing, Steve?
Well, Raymond, the key time frame, I think, is this year, because Taiwan is building up its military defenses. China is not quite ready for an invasion. We can talk about why not. But it did just this week conduct a blockade-style exercise around the island. And you had airplanes and ships all around the island blocking or practicing a blockade of Taiwan's major ports, which would, in the event of an actual blockade, cut the island off from trade, cut the island off from sources of oil and natural gas. And the island would be, I think, in trouble after a few weeks as it ran short of energy. So I'm very worried about a blockade. An invasion, Xi Jinping, China's dictator, has said, we want to take Taiwan back by 2027. That's only 2 years away now. And I know they are frantically now building invasion barges. I was
going to talk about that story. The New York Times had that story this week where they have these. Explain to people what these are. These are basically floating bridges. Explain to them, Steve, what this is and what it means.
They are. People may remember World War II landing craft, okay? These are giant versions of the same, except instead of an offloading ramp, they have a huge extendable bridge-like structure for offloading. So you can sit 100 yards offshore, you can extend this huge ramp, and then you can get your tanks and your armored personnel carriers and your self-propelled artillery off the ship and onto the ground for an invasion. Now, they're building lots of these things, and the only possible use for these invasion barges is invading Taiwan. They're not useful for transporting cargo. They're not useful for transporting oil or anything else. So clearly they're building up a fleet of these things for the purpose of an invasion. They're not done yet. Taiwan is a tough nut to crack because the west coast of the island is all mud flats, extending out for about a mile into the ocean. You can't land on those. The east coast is all rocky cliffs and rocky shores. Hard to land on those. That's why they're building these invasion barges. I am, quite frankly, worried about a blockade right now, because they could try to cut off the island from commerce with the rest of the world, which would hurt not only Taiwan, but the United States and other countries that do trade with Taiwan. And I was very, very pleased to see, for the first time in the last 5 years, that we issued a strong statement, the State Department did, in defense of Taiwan. We said that China was engaging in intimidation tactics and destabilizing behavior, and the U.S.'s enduring commitment to our allies and partner, including Taiwan, continues. Now, that's a stern warning to Beijing to keep their hands off Taiwan. They have virtually declared war against the elected president of Taiwan, President Lai, who basically has said that China is a hostile foreign power. Well, it is, and it's behaved with hostility towards not just Taiwan, but toward a lot of its neighbors, Japan, the Philippines, and of course towards the United States of America.
You know, I hate these suppositions, but I'm going to throw one out anyway. Hypotheticals.
Okay.
What if they end up invading Taiwan? What do you think the United States reaction would be, given what we're seeing in Ukraine?
Well, the reason that we have ongoing conflicts in the Middle East and ongoing conflicts in Ukraine, first of all, is because of China's support of those incursions by Putin against Ukraine and support of Iran and, by extension, Hamas in the Middle East. So this is an effort at one level by China to disperse our forces and deplete our munitions. Now, sad to say, given the state of our supply chains, which in part are dependent upon China that has been successful. We have a lot of assets now in the Middle East. We have far fewer than we would need in the Far East to help with the defense of Taiwan. The good news is that Japan is restructuring its military command structure and moving forces south towards the islands, which are very close to Taiwan, the southern islands of Japan. The Philippines has said that any conflict over Taiwan would necessarily involve it. So the other countries in Asia are actually stepping up and saying, you know, it's really not good for us for China to invade and take over Taiwan because that will threaten our security. And I think that sort of joint response, that sort of joining together with other countries and forming a pseudo alliance against Chinese aggression is probably the best way to deter it.
China said on Thursday that it will firmly oppose those U.S. tariffs on its exports, saying U.S. tariffs are in violation of international trade rules. President Trump imposed a 10% tariff on imports from all over the world, 34% tariffs aimed at China, in addition to the 10% base tariff. Beijing is calling for dialogue, Steve. How much damage is being done to China's economy, if any? And your thoughts on the impact of this and what you think the response will be from China?
Well, the base tariff on China is actually more than 10%. It's 20%, plus the 34%. They're going to have a tariff of 54% on all the goods that they ship to the United States. And the exemption for all these little packages that come from China that worth $300, $400 is gone now. So all these small postal shipments, they have to pay tariff on those too. Now, I think that China's exporters are going to have to actually eat most of the tariffs in order to try to protect their market share in the United States. So I don't expect a great impact on consumers in the United States. And I find it, quite frankly, completely ridiculous that we have papers like the New York Times declaring the trade war begins. My goodness, Raymond, the trade war began decades ago when China, when all those other nations, including China first and foremost, put tariffs on American goods and drove American companies out of business and drove their workers to the unemployment lines. And we did nothing. You know, China has been cheating on trade for decades, buying off our politicians, duping Wall Street into investing in China rather than the United States. You know, it's almost as if we had a kick me sign on our backside and China was more than happy to oblige. But I'm happy that the gravy train is over for Chinese communist elites who've gotten wealthy off of cheating on trade with the United States. I think their days of ripping off America, breaking the backs of hardworking Americans, and looting us of our industries and hollowing out our heartland are over. And I think these tariffs will help to level the playing field. Now, they're still not even at 54%. China is still cheating us more than those tariffs will offer a corrective for. Okay?
They don't offset the amount of the American tariffs, which are much higher. I mean, we've got hundreds of billions of dollars. We're at a trade imbalance with these countries, including China.
Yeah, and it's unsustainable. People need to realize that, there may be some short-term pain, but there will be huge long-term gain. We cannot sustain this continual hollowing out of our manufacturing base. This lack of domestic manufacturing capacity. In COVID, we were dependent upon pharmaceuticals from where? From China, the same country that actually spread COVID around the world. That's the height of foolishness. And of course, we now have military equipment that is in part dependent upon electronic components from where? From China. That also is the height of foolishness. So I think this is a necessary corrective. Most of the countries, including China, will soon be at the negotiating table. And we will have, for the first time, fair trade. There's no such thing as free trade in the world today. There's free trade within the borders of the United States. But when you go outside those borders, you find countries all over the world keeping our goods out one way or another, like China does, and exporting as much as they can to the United States, the biggest consumer market in the world. And quite frankly, they need us a lot more than we need them. And finally, we have a president who's standing up for the American middle class and American workers, and I applaud.
In the Panama Canal Zone, China is holding up a $23 billion sale of dozens of ports all over the world, but those two of special significance are at either end of the Panama Canal. A Chinese conglomerate had said they were going to sell to a U.S. group led by BlackRock after President Trump voiced his concerns about Beijing's outsized influence in the entire Panama Canal Zone. Steve, were you surprised that the Chinese group was even prepared to sell to that U.S.-based investment crowd?
Well, I was in a way, Raymond, because in 1996, when Hutchinson Whampoa, run by the wealthiest man in Hong Kong, Li Ka-shing, when they decided to buy the ports at either end of the Panama Canal, that was before Hong Kong reverted to China's control the year after. And after that, we all began to realize, well, I was opposed to giving the canal away to begin with, but we all realized after that that the Panama Canal was now effectively in control of a Chinese-owned company that was under the control of the Chinese Communist Party's leaders in Beijing. Now, when President Trump first talked about recovering the canal in one way or another, at least control of it and ensuring the security for safe passage of American naval vessels, for example, back and forth, ensuring that it would remain open in the event of conflict in Asia or around the world. When he first said that, China said, well, we have no control over the canal. This is a private company, Hutchinson Whampoa in Hong Kong, and they're running it entirely without our interference, and we have nothing to do with it. Well, as soon as Hutchinson Whampoa decided to sell it to a U.S. company, what happened? Oh, we can't allow that. So this is a tacit admission that China was interested in the securing control over the Panama Canal from the beginning, for the same reason that it opened up a naval base in Djibouti, which controls access to the Red Sea and indirectly to the Suez Canal, for the same reason that it set up a naval base in Cambodia, which is close to the Straits of Malacca, another maritime choke point that you would want to choke off in the event of conflict if you were in China, to prevent U.S. naval vessels from participating in the war. So this is part of a global strategy on the part of China. I hope that we can force the sale through, but right now they're investigating the wealthiest man in Hong Kong for possible violations of security laws. How do you think that's going to wind up?
Yeah, the same way our Jimmy Lai, who we'll talk about in a moment, also ended up. Steve, before we run out of time, I want to get your take on the ongoing problems of religious freedom in Communist China. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom just released its annual report covering 2024. They say this: religious freedom conditions in China remained among the worst in the world. Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping continued to lead efforts to update and enforce China's sinicization of religion policy, which requires the complete loyalty and subordination of recognized religious groups to the CCP, its political ideology, and its policy agenda. Steve, China is still considered a country of particular concern when it comes to religious freedom, but it doesn't seem there are any consequences for that designation.
Well, there should be, because China is persecuting Catholics. It's persecuting Christians of all kinds. It's persecuting Tibetan Buddhists. It's persecuting Uyghur Muslims in the far west. It's persecuting the Mongolians. And basically because the governing ideology of China is communism. That is a cult with its own idea of establishing heaven on earth, with its own church, which is basically the patriotic church of China that everyone has to worship in. It has its own quote unquote pope, who is Xi Jinping, the supreme leader, who expects to be virtually worshipped by the people. He has a thriving personality cult. So the persecution of Catholics in China continues, and we need to speak out even more strongly about it. I am hopeful that with Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, and I know Senator Rubio, he has been on China's case in terms of human rights for a long, long time. And I believe we will see in the coming months, we will see sterner measures taken towards those officials who persecute Catholics and Christians and other religions in China.
Well, speaking of persecution, Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey has sponsored a bill seeking to rename a stretch of road near DuPont Circle Jimmy Lai Way in D.C. to honor the incarcerated Chinese dissident, Catholic freedom fighter. The street, interestingly, Steve, runs alongside the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office. Jimmy Lai is, of course, 77 years old, in very poor health. He's in solitary confinement. He's been there for more than 1,500 days. And
Yes.
As we mentioned a little earlier, he's being tried under this national security law, which is their favorite law to throw down, to basically imprison people they disagree with or want to control. A few weeks ago, Lai's son, Sebastian, was in the U.S. He claims Jimmy could die in prison. Your
Yes.
thoughts on his condition, and does something as, I guess, minuscule as renaming a street, might that change the math here at all or move the needle of his case?
Well, there's a lot we can do. But first of all, back to Jimmy Lai and his personal situation. Yes, he's being held in solitary confinement. The trial is going on and on and on. In this case, we say, Raymond, the process is a punishment. They're just dragging this out as long as possible so they can keep him in solitary confinement, keep him away from contact with his family and other supporters. What the United States ought to do is I think that Congressman Chris Smith's move is long overdue. But I would go further. I would shut down the Hong Kong office in Washington, D.C. Hong Kong is now a part of China. It does not deserve a separate consulate in the United States. We should stop with the pretense that Hong Kong is somehow, one country, two systems. It's not a separate system. It's under the direct control of the Chinese Communist Party. Let's acknowledge that fact. And while we're shutting down that office, let's shut down the other dozen secret police stations in American cities like Minneapolis, St. Paul, and other cities. We did that in New York City. We've got to do it in other cities. Shut down these undercover operatives who try to persecute dissidents, Chinese dissidents in the United States on our own sovereign territory, and of course try to wine and dine American local politicians to gain power and influence. And let's reduce the staff of the consulates and the embassy of the People's Republic of China to the same number as the number of staffers we have in China. Let's have strict reciprocity there. If we have 120 people in China representing the U.S., they should only have 120 people here. Right now, they have thousands, Raymond.
Wow. Yeah, that should definitely be abridged. And again, reciprocity is a good thing. Steve, we'll leave it there. The Devil and Communist China, from Mao down to Xi, by Stephen Mosher, is available at bookstores everywhere. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.